Hi, welcome back to CS170 spring session. Gonna be covering arrays today, so walk through a couple of these slides here and get going. I'm gonna run some examples on JSDO. Okay, so what's an array? Um, I think the best way for me to think about an array is a series of buckets, right? So you think about a variable that's just like, one item, right? So let's say the gallons of gas, right? So you put a number in there to tell you how many gallons of gas you want to do. That was from the gasoline example before. Um, could be that you have let's say you want to keep track of a number of people on your team, and there could be people that come in and out of your team or something like that, and you want to be able to keep track of all that. So that's where you have something like an array. An array is a collection of similar types of data elements, right? So if we're talking about a collection of people, right, people's names, you can put them into this collection, and then you can refer to them, okay? And so each of those bucket names would be what you would use to refer to them. And the reason why they teach the array and the loops, and what we've been covering for the last couple of lectures, the for loops, is that it's very common to process arrays with for loops. Okay, there's other ways to do it, obviously, but that's the most common way, and I'll demonstrate that for you shortly. Okay, so there's a couple parts to an array. Okay, number one, you have a name, right? And the names are very similar to how you look at variables. So whatever conventions you thought about for variables, it's going to be the same thing when you name an array. Okay, and I'll show you the syntax for naming an array soon. Okay, and then you have here's like each of the buckets, right? Right. So each of these spaces you see here is the bucket, and within that is the data, right? So you have, for this case, we have the number of hours worked per day. Okay. So this is an array that has hours worked each day. Well, actually not each day, probably each week it looks like. Okay. Then you have like 50 hours, 75 hours, 0, 5, 12, and 60. Okay, so you're going to hold these numbers into the array, and then how do you reference them, right? And one of the things that kind of catches a lot of people, you have to try to remember that the number that you index, each element of the array starts off with 0, right? So if I refer to the first element of the array, or the first bucket for the array, I'm going to refer to 0, right? And then the next one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so this holds 6 numbers, but there's only going from 0 to 5 on your index. And you have to remember that, because when you do things like for loops and stuff like that, you have to remember which index you're referring to when you access each element on the array. Okay, so this kind of repeats what I just said. So you have the declaration, right? So the var, same thing as like declaring your variable, and you declare hours worked. So far so good. It's like exactly like how you declare a variable. But when you see the equals and then you say new array, this is basically saying you're going to have a new array of six elements. Okay, so 6 index elements or buckets. Okay, and the index always starts with 0, as I noted, right? And this is case sensitive, so do note the point here where there's a capital A here, right? There's a difference, right? When you're talking about in this programming language, it is case sensitive, right? As we noted with the camel case and stuff like that, right? So hours worked, that's an example of camel case. So A here is important, right? Capital A. Okay, so you access each of the buckets by the name and the index of that bucket. So in this case, if I want this element or this bucket with 5 in it, you would say the name, which is hours worked, open bracket, 3, which is the index here, and then close bracket, right? And then so when I reference that, you can print it, you like alert or something like that, just like with any other variable, right? So once you have this defined, that you say, okay, I want this element or this bucket, then I would work with it just like any other variable, right? But just remember the syntax with the brackets and then the index that's inside of it, okay? And then you can also do something called length, right? So you can refer to it, let's say in this case we define hours worked dot length. And this tells me how many buckets are inside this array. And that's important when, when you originally write the program, you may not know how big you want this array to be at the beginning. So you want it to be flexible. You don't want to hard code it and say, well, I'm always going to process an array that has 10 buckets or something like that. So you'll probably do something like this where you say hours work dot length. So no matter how many buckets I define for this array, your loop will be able to handle it. Okay? And this is just what I referred to before. The first element always starts with an index of 0, and then the last one is the length of the array minus 1. Okay, so in this case, notice the last index is 5. Okay, your length was 6, so therefore the last one is 5 here. Okay. The other thing you can look at here is you can just run through this and you can allocate your variables, the values, to these variables, just like you normally would with any other variable, right? But the only difference is, you see I did 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So that's just going through each of the elements or buckets and allocating or assigning a variable, assigning a value, I should say, to the variable. Okay, so this is weekdays, this is an array, 0 through 6, and then Monday through Sunday. Okay, and then here is going the other way. So here you were putting a value into like each of the buckets of the array. Down here you're going the other way, where you're going to the third bucket, right, or index 3 I should say. It's actually the fourth bucket, and then assigning it to today, and then you do an alert for today. If you do that, you should be able to see what's here, which would be Thursday. Okay. There's other ways to put this in here. So here we define an array called dwarf, which has 7 elements in it. And then we declare a variable do as 2. Okay. Now this is like a standard thing, right, where I put in a 0 and a 1. But notice what I did here. You put in a variable in here, and then that variable happened to be equals to 2, and then you put dopey in there. I'm going to take advantage of that shortly when I give a demonstration of the for loop here, right? And then you have do plus 1, which makes it 3, and then 2 times do, which is 4, right? 3 times do minus 1, which is 5, so on and so forth. So all this is trying to demonstrate is that this integer that you're working on with each of the index for the array, you can play around with it. You don't have to kind of hard code it and reference it like the 0 and the 1 here. You can stick variables in here. Okay, so very quickly, I actually set this up here just to give you a demonstration. Okay, so it's a couple of different things here. Number one, I did the hours worked, new array of 6. And what I did here, I declared the for loop. So you remember the for loop from the last couple of lectures. So var x equals to 0, I declared the variable x, initialized it to 0, and then while it's less than 6, I keep on incrementing it plus plus, x plus plus. And then I went through, see, this is where I applied the x as a variable inside of here. So that's going to keep on going up because of this for loop. And then I'm just saying what the value should be equals to x times 10. Okay. The other thing I did here is I did an alert. This alert shows me the array size, and I'm showing hours work.length. And then to display what's actually inside this array, I do another for loop, and I'm going to go through each time in the loop. I'm going to tell you which loop I'm in and what's the value inside of there. right? So that's why I have hours worked Y, okay? Here's another way to set up an array. You can see up here, I just did array and 6, right? Here, I declared an array called people, and I declared new array, and I actually put in like the values that I'm going to put in for each of the buckets, right? So in this case, I said Joe, Mary, Tom, and Alicia, right? Now I did another for loop, and again, since I don't really know how many members I'm going to put into this array, I did this. I did the for loop when I said people.length, right? And then same thing as the usual for loops. I equals a 0, I plus plus. And then I did a document write, and then I'm looping through each of the elements of the people array, and then I'm doing a return here. Okay, so let's see what all this turns out to be. You see a little bit of it over here already. So we run it. So we're here. It says the array size is 6, which is fine, right? This is over here, and we know it's 6, right? And then I'm going in here. The first loop is 0, right? Y equals to 0, so the first time through, the loop will be 0, and the value will be 0. If you remember up here, the first one, 0 times 10, will be 0, okay? The next time I go through the loop, it will be on bucket number 1, and that's 1 times 10, so that makes it 10. 20, 30, 40, 50, and then we're out. And then what I did here was to print out all the elements that I initialized this array with, Joe, Mary, Tom, and Alicia, with the returns here with the BR, line breaks, okay? So Joe, Mary, Tom, and Alicia, okay? So that's a little bit of a demonstration of how to use, how to declare the array, how to assign values to the array, how to look at the length of the array, and how to iterate through the array using a for loop. Okay, so that covers a lot here. So hopefully this is some good example code that you can refer to as you work with arrays. Okay, so you know, same thing here. This is what I just covered. Here, you can see they set up the for loop exactly the way I did, right? So you have the math array, and then you did the length here, and then you keep on looping through, iterating through to populate it, right? So they did math answers I equals to I times 3. They did the alert, and then they did the document write. Now, note what they did here. They actually did the alert to show the whole array, okay? There's no brackets here. So when you do the alert like this, that's why you just show the whole array like that, okay? Okay, and this is a little bit similar to what I was just showing with the people array that I did here. Okay, but basically it's populating the array and then looping through and printing out all the elements within the array. Okay, this one here extends a little bit. You can play around with this on your own. So the top part is the same thing of what we just did here, but here what they did was they creating a function called pick random, right? And then they're going to pass in the range that you want to put in, and then you're going to do the random. And remember what I said, when you do random, it's a value between 0 and 1. But if you want to make it bigger, let's say you want a random number between 1 and 100, what do? You're going to multiply it by the range, right? So let's say I want to do 100, right? So then it'll be multiplied by 100. So then it becomes a number between 0 and 100, okay? And then you're going to do a floor on that, so you can you round it. Well, not really round it, take it down to the lowest number. So that's how you create a random number that goes beyond what the computer would normally give you, which would be a random number between 0 and 1. Okay, so you multiply it out. You want a number between 1 and 10, or 1 and 100, or whatever, right? So here, you can see we declared it with the range, and what was the range? Well, do the range as pick random number people.len, so that's your range. So how many people are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's 7 people, so they want basically a number between 1 and 7. Actually, I should fix myself. It's actually 0 and 7. Okay, so so it's going to be between 0 and 7. Okay, because remember the elements of the array is going to be starting from 0 to 6. All right, and so that's why you actually have the floor here, right? So you can have, you know, some number that will start off at 0 as your lowest number and goes all the way up to 99. Let's say I passed in a range of 100. Okay, so that's something to pay attention to. I neglected to mention that. Okay, and so document right, lucky one is, and then you do people, and then the lucky number, which will be a number between 0 and 6. Okay, because there's 7 elements in the array. Okay, so think about that. Let me know if there's any questions on that one. And this just demonstrates what the output would be. Okay, so this one is just demonstrating to stick this on a button, right? So here's your button here. You pick choose, or you put choose as the label on here. And no, I said that wrong. You named it choose right here. This is your ID as your choose. Here's the label for it down here. Okay, and here's your on click. So on click, this is where you stick in your JavaScript code. Okay, so your lucky number is your rand number, which is what you did up here, and then you're gonna just assign the lucky one based on whatever number you came back here and pull that person out of that array. So people lucky num, which is what you got here, right? This is the first reference to this, right? So this is another way from within your JavaScript. Remember, everything on your on click is your JavaScript to access your HTML elements. Okay, so in this case, you see this element, right? The ID equals the person, right? So where it says document, that's your HTML document, and then you get element by ID, person, and then .inner HTML. That basically goes to here. Okay, and then what is the text that you want to put in for that? This is where you have the single quote, then you have ... and the lucky person is, and then plus lucky one, which you assigned up here. Okay, so if you want to try that, that's something else that you can try out. Like I said, this bolded part here, this bolded part, and this bolded part is a new thing that you might want to try out. This is how within JavaScript you're accessing those elements on your document, your HTML document, and you're accessing by this ID person, like that. Okay, so something to try out. So this is something, simple problem. You can look at that as your extra credit for this week. So you can create an array named days. So you can have the 7 days for the week. So you create the array, unlike the other thing at the beginning where it was talking about how many hours per week, this will be hours per day. So each bucket or each element within the array would be how many hours you work for that day. Okay, and this point here where it says you can use an initializer list for this now, this is basically what the initializer list means, right? So you have your new array. In this case, they're using names of people, but in our case, we're using numbers, right? So how many hours per day? Okay, so you do the same thing as this, but just put numbers in here. Okay, so that's what it means here is when it says you can use an initializer list for this. Okay, now you're going to create a function called find total pay that will return you the total pay for the week given the hours that you put in. Okay, and you remember, I think we did this earlier in one of the lectures where we talked about, you getting paid overtime. So anytime you work over 40 hours, you would make sure that calculations does multiplication times 1.5 for whatever rate you want to pay. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you how many dollars per hour you want to put in there. Whatever dollars per hour you want to put in there to calculate your total pay, that's fine. Right? If you want to, you can do it as an input and say, how many dollars an hour do you get paid? And then your total pay would do a calculation. Up to 40 hours is just a straight calculation, the number of hours times whatever pay you want to put in, or whatever hourly rate you want to put in. Once you go over 40 hours, do a 1.5 to get your overtime pay, and then add those two numbers together. Okay? So hopefully that's a pretty straightforward problem to do. And if you do this should give you some good practice. I know some people are kind of still having some problems using the buttons, so maybe you want to use a button to call that function, find total pay. So once you have this should give you a good way to figure out how to declare an array, how to initialize the array, how to create a function to do a calculation, how to use a button to call that function. So it covers a lot of different things that you can use as reference or examples for your other work. Okay. I think there's maybe some other lectures I want to potentially look at cutting this week for some of the common questions that I'm getting. But we'll see how that goes. Okay. But for now, this is covering the arrays. And I'll give you another look here for some of the little snippets of code that I wrote here if you want to play around with this for arrays. Okay, thank you.